Welcome to today's explainer. We throw the word attitude around all the time, don't we? Like, oh, they've got a bad attitude, or I need to shift my attitude today. But what actually is it? Well, today, our goal is to take this kind of abstract idea and break it down into a tangible scientific framework. We're literally going to map out the anatomy of an attitude to understand exactly how our hidden beliefs end up driving our everyday behavior. So let's dive right in. To start, I want you to think of an attitude not just as a passing mood, but literally like a pair of spectacles, right? There's an objective world out there, cold, hard facts, events happening totally independently of us. But the second you look at that world, you're looking through your own customized lenses. Your attitude colors, distorts, and shapes that reality into a completely subjective interpretation. You never actually see the world exactly as it is, you only ever see it as you are. Getting a grip on this concept? It's absolutely crucial. It's the bedrock of human psychology.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First, we're going to look at the anatomy of attitude. Then, we'll unpack the CAB model. Zoom into the darker side with stereotypes and prejudice. Figure out how to measure these dimensions. And finally, wrap up with conscious versus subconscious attitudes. Section 1, the anatomy of attitude. So where do these mental spectacles actually come from? Because let's be real, they don't just magically appear out of thin air. The crucial point here is that attitudes actually evolve chronologically. It's like a chain reaction. It all starts with a simple belief, just a thought you hold to be true. But a belief alone, it's not really enough to drive you. When you attach emotions to that belief, boom, it upgrades into a value. Now it's got some real weight to it. And when those emotionally charged values start bleeding into your actual behavior, well, congratulations, you've officially formed an attitude. It's this fascinating gradual evolution from a simple, fleeting thought into a full-blown behavioral driver that literally dictates how you walk through the world. If we look at the formal definition from our source material, it points out something incredibly vital. Attitude is a learned tendency. We aren't born with these specific lenses. We aren't genetically programmed to favor or disfavor specific objects, places, or groups of people. We learn to act, think, and feel in particular ways over time, and that's based entirely on our environment, our upbringing, the whole shebang. Every single attitude you have was built, which is kind of exciting because it means it can also be rebuilt. Moving on to Section 2, the CAB model explained. Now, what's really fascinating here is that we're about to put an attitude under a microscope to look at its fundamental DNA. So the golden key to understanding human behavior is the CAB model. That's CAB, cognitive, affective, and behavioral. The cognitive component, that's purely about your thoughts, your ideas, your beliefs. Then you have the affective component. This is about your feelings and emotions, basically how your heart reacts to those thoughts. And finally, the behavioral component is about your actions, what you actually do based on past experiences. Now, these three have a deeply synergistic relationship. If you hold a positive belief about something, that usually generates a positive feeling, which ultimately results in a positive action. But keep in mind, this powerful synergy applies to negative thoughts, feelings, and actions just as seamlessly. Section 3, stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. Let's look at how the CAB model operates in the real world, specifically by examining the darker side of societal interactions. When cognitive beliefs go wrong, we get stereotypes, adopted beliefs about groups that totally fail to reflect reality. Our source notes that these form largely due to overgeneralization and faulty, incomplete data. They cite examples like viewing Africans as involved in drug peddling or having low hygiene. It's basically a purely cognitive misstep, a thought process based entirely on bad information and broad, sweeping generalizations rather than individual facts. Next, we hit the A in the CAB model, affection or feeling. And this is where we find prejudice. The word literally means to prejudge. Unlike stereotypes, which are thought-based, prejudice is driven largely by emotion. It entirely bypasses relevant facts. The source illustrates this with the flawed assumption that someone from your own caste will inherently be more helpful to you. It's a judgment rooted in tribal feeling and emotional comfort, completely detached from objective reality or a person's actual character. And this brilliantly illustrates how we arrive at the final piece of the puzzle, discrimination, the behavioral component. When cognitive stereotypes and affective prejudice merge, they result in the physical act of treating someone differently based on their group, completely ignoring their individual merit. It fundamentally denies people their basic social participation and human rights. Interestingly, the source points out that even positive discrimination can be highly destructive in the long term because it ultimately stifles the spirit of true equality and fairness within a society. Section 4. Measuring attitude dimensions. We know what attitudes are made of and how they can go wrong, but how do we actually measure their internal physics? Scientists measure attitudes primarily through two dimensions: strength and accessibility. Because, let's face it, not all attitudes are created equal. Think of a brand you absolutely love. That's a strong, highly accessible attitude. It pops into your head immediately, and it easily predicts your buying behavior. Basically, the faster an attitude comes to your mind, meaning the more accessible it is, the stronger it is, and the more likely it is to dictate exactly what you're going to do next. But then we have a third dimension: attitude ambivalence. Imagine having exactly 50% positive evaluations and 50% negative evaluations about a single thing. When the ratio of positive and negative thoughts is perfectly equal, ambivalence peaks. This is that profoundly familiar feeling of being completely and utterly torn on an issue, right? You're paralyzed from taking any action at all because the scales in your mind are perfectly balanced and just locked in a stalemate. Now, before we hit our final section, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to really think about it. Do you actually know your own mind? You might think you have a firm grip on exactly why you do what you do, but the science suggests something entirely different. Which brings us to Section 5, conscious versus subconscious attitudes. We need to take a hard look at the awareness, or really the total lack thereof, that we have regarding our own mental programming. Let's see how this builds into a complete picture of the mind. Think of it like a giant iceberg. Above the surface, we have explicit attitudes. These are the ones you actually know about. You form them consciously, and you are fully aware of how they dictate your actions and choices every single day. But lurking completely below the surface are implicit attitudes. You are entirely unaware of these subconscious beliefs, yet they still heavily influence your behavior. You could literally be acting on specific preferences or prejudices right now that are flying entirely under your conscious radar, silently steering your life. Crazy, right? To wrap up our explainer today, let's quickly recap the core features of an attitude. They're truly universal. It doesn't matter your status, wealth, or intelligence, every single person relies on them. They're always evaluative, leaning toward either favor or disfavor. They don't just happen overnight, they are gradually acquired over a lifetime. They are the absolute primary engine behind our actions. And perhaps most importantly, as we just saw, they can govern our entire lives completely unconsciously. So, I'll leave you with a final provocative thought today. What spectacles are you unknowingly wearing right now? What implicit attitudes are silently distorting the objective world into your own subjective reality? Understanding the anatomy of attitude isn't just a fascinating academic exercise, it's the very first step to truly understanding yourself and the hidden forces driving your behavior. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks some deep self-reflection about the lenses you look through every single day.